Zelensky's trying to put public pressure on Putin, somehow thinking that if he can make people around the world think that Zelensky is just a peace activist, but it's Putin, it's keeping the war going on, that somehow that's going to put pressure on Putin to say, all right, tell you what, I'll go ahead and have a ceasefire that works for you. That's what Zelensky's trying to do. He's got confidence that he can continue to hold out. The Europeans continue to make these kinds of comments, supporting as long as it takes. We're going to give you billions more dollars and new defense packages. It would be one thing if it was just the Europeans, but there are still those in the United States that want to feed that narrative. One of the biggest ones is General Chris Cavoli, who testified earlier this week for the Senate Armed Services Committee, saying that, look, Russia's a little bit better than they were, but overall, in some areas, overall, they're getting weaker. So yeah, keep fighting.
As we watch the Russians, we see that their level of skill in some technical areas is very high and is evolving during the course of the war, but it's mainly isolated in specific pockets. It does not appear to be generalizable across the force, and overall the quality of their force, especially their ground force, has been decreasing throughout the conflict. On the Ukrainian side, we see sort of the opposite. We see a military that started pretty much from an almost cold start. We had been helping them before the war, but not at the scale we began to after the war, and they've evolved and developed very, very quickly.
Just imagine now, if you want someone who's going to tell you the truth about where this war is and where it's going to be going, and you have Zelensky, who's been just relentless throughout the entire, now into the fourth year of war, constantly saying, give me more stuff. I need more weapons. I need ammo. I need NATO extension. I want some foreign troops, all the things that he's asking for all the time. And now here you have in April of 2025, now into the fourth year of the war, who's saying, oh, the Russians are getting worse and worse and worse. And the Ukraine side is the opposite. They're getting better and better. What that would tell you is, if that were accurate, you'd say, oh, well, then don't have a negotiated settlement. Don't end now. Don't have anything that submits to the Russians. Keep fighting, because they're going to keep getting worse and your side's going to keep getting better. I assure you, that is exactly the message that's heard by Volodymyr Zelensky. So at the same time, you have the president, the commander-in-chief of the United States, saying, we're trying to get this deal wrapped up. We want to negotiate a settlement quickly. We want to get this off the table, and we want to reset relations with the Russians going forward. We're already looking past the war. You have the commanding general of the United States European Command saying, just keep fighting, because the Russians are getting weaker. I mean, what sense would it make if he's accurate? Wait, the Russians are getting weaker and weaker and the Ukraine side's getting stronger and stronger? Well, then just keep fighting, because now then you've turned the tide. Now things are going in your direction. Now, if that were true, that might be a reasonable policy course of action to take. You would still, even in that scenario, have to say, all right, but what would be the cost of turning it around? That's one of the questions you could ask. And so that still might not be an obvious one, but it would sure give a lot of grist to the possibility of let's go forward. Now, one of the other things that he specifically cited in there, that again, just music to Zelensky's ears, is he's again talking about F-16s.
There are a number of F-16s in there. There are a number of pilots in there. There are more F-16s prepared to be deployed in there. There are more pilots in the training pipeline, sir. The planes are active and they fly every day. They've defeated a large number of cruise missile threats, and they've delivered an awful lot of offensive attacks as well, specifically bombing attacks in the east. None of the F-16s has been from the U.S., though. They've mainly been from Northern European countries, Netherlands, Denmark.
How effective have the long-range missiles that we've allowed Ukrainians to shoot into Russia, how effective has that been?
Very.
In all areas?
Yeah, they've been extremely effective, sir. I could go into this in private session, but the United States makes some very good weaponry. And it's the ones we've donated have been very, very effective.
The F-16s are coming. There's more in the pipeline. It's getting stronger. They're doing great, taking down cruise missiles, all this kind of stuff. So you see, hey, they're getting more of them. More are on the way. So the pipeline's getting better. Again, trending in the positive direction for the Ukraine side. Then he was specifically asked on long-range weapons. And you saw Cavoli do something like, yeah, they're working really good. Oh, I can't touch classified. I can tell you behind closed doors, but it's going really well. What does that even mean? It's effective. It's very effective. We know for a fact, because it's been even reported in the New York Times of all places, has admitted that much of our long-range missiles, the ATACMS, the HIMARS systems, which are similar guidance systems that they have been severely degraded by the Russian electronic warfare. So they have found effective ways to minimize and limit the effectiveness of those things. And even on those cases where they have hit targets, they clearly have. You've seen some of the fires from the Russian side, especially on some of the energy, petroleum sites, et cetera, within Russia and some in the Moscow area. You've seen them actually have success on targets, and it caused Russia genuine harm. Now, when you say, are they effective? You need to define that term, because effective, did a long-range missile land on Russian target and blow it up and hurt Russia? Yes, clearly that happened. Is it effective in terms of the war? No. Yeah, it may have hit the target that time. Maybe 10 others didn't hit the target, but whatever that number is that hit the target, does it change the course of the war? Has it caused Russia to lose effectiveness at the front line? Has it made Russia stop going on the offensive? Does it have anything to do with their manpower pool that they have? Does it do anything to their economy, to their defense industrial base? So far, the answer is no, no, and no. It hasn't had any effect on any of those things. When you see General Cavoli and the senators who were asking the question to try and elicit this answer to give impression that the Ukraine side is getting stronger and the Russian side is getting weaker, you have to look at these long-range missiles from the Russian side, which have gone now almost a nightly affair, whether it's a long-range drone, Kinzhal missile, or any of the other kinds of long-range fires they have, the glide bombs, etc. They have been absolutely pummeling the Ukraine side since late 2022. So well over 2 full years now, well into the third. It's been a routine situation to where you've had all their energy infrastructure, their arms depots, sometimes bridges, train situations, the tracks themselves, everything to damage and diminish their ability to sustain war. It's been relentless. The air defenses just continues to be whittled away on the Ukraine side. It's always been behind, even with as much stuff as they're getting, it's never enough to knock everything out, or even a substantial portion, because too much gets through. On the Ukraine side, these handful of missiles that he's talking about, whether it's Storm Shadow, ATACMS, basically pinpricks. I mean, Russia is vastly larger, even geographically, than the Ukraine side. They have their stuff intentionally spread all throughout their country to make it very difficult, especially stuff on the other side of the Urals, which is one of the things that they did during World War II to prevent the Germans from being able to hit those targets, and it had success then. Same situation is the case today, except the Russian air defense is profoundly better than it was during the Second World War in terms of percentages knocked out. So these that have gotten through, of course, they make great video, and it makes people think good only because you don't know the context. So you see these images of oil fires burning in Russia, and everybody wants to clap on the Western side. But then you got to say, what does that do to the overall number? How many oil facilities do they have? How much capacity do they have? And so far, the answer has just been a pinprick, and it gets repaired afterwards. So for General Cavoli to tell you, yes, they're effective, yes, the Ukraine side is getting better, that doesn't square with what we see on the ground. The continual destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces, because as I say relentlessly, and we'll say again here today to reinforce how critical and central this is to the discussion, the armed forces are really about whether you're going to win or lose a war. It's about manpower, trained manpower. Who has the most, who has the best industrial capacity, and who can sustain the war at the front in all the logistics areas. Those 4 things, all on the Russian side. If what I just told you is true in how wars work, and then how this one is working, then one would come to the rational conclusion that the Ukraine side cannot win this war, and it cannot avoid defeat if a negotiated settlement is coming in. That's the conclusion that should be drawn rationally by any military man. Instead, General Cavoli comes to this conclusion.
There's nothing inevitable in war. And the Ukrainians are in very strong defensive positions right now and are improving weekly their ability to generate force and to reinforce those positions. It is hard sitting here right now to envision a major Ukrainian offensive that clears everybody, out of every square inch of Ukraine. But likewise, it's very hard to envision Ukraine collapsing and losing that conflict. I do not think there's an inevitability to a Ukrainian loss.
There's nothing inevitable in war. Of course, there's things that are inevitable in war. There are always isolated situations to where the balance of power that should have worked out in one way didn't. There are isolated spots in that, but even those usually have caveats. But in the vast majority of war, there is inevitability. When the United States had its coalition in 1991, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, there was this big 500,000 member force that went in there. It was inevitable we were going to win that war. It was inevitable. There was no question about it. And we went in with a sledgehammer when maybe a little mallet might have gotten this job done to make sure. It was inevitable we were going to win that war. In 2003, it was inevitable that we were going to be able to take our tanks and roll into Baghdad because the Iraq side had nothing to stop that with. So it was inevitable there. This situation is also inevitable because of all the inputs I just showed you are overwhelmingly in the Russian favor and getting stronger, by the way. The disparity continues to grow. So whether Russia continues to slow and methodical grind and does it for another year, year and a half even, it's inevitable that they're going to finally grind Ukraine down to nothing, and they won't have anyone left to put in uniform, or there just won't be anyone left, and they'll eventually just walk into Kiev probably unopposed. Or they may do something like I've been suggesting that they may, and they may finally use some of this combat power that's out of contact now. We're talking hundreds of thousands of troops, potentially up to 300,000 in a couple of different spots altogether, where they could find the weakest spots of this brittle defense and punch through it and cause this war to come to an even more rapid end. I don't know. We've seen some evidence that they're getting ready to do that. They haven't tried it yet. But no matter which course of action they choose, the big arrow or the slow methodical grind, they're going to eventually grind them down. It is inevitable. And it is irrational, illogical, and I argue immoral to ignore all of that balance of power and to continue to give Volodymyr Zelensky any kind of hope, because all that's going to do is create the situation where tens, if not hundreds of thousands of men are going to die in another pointless effort. For us to have the president trying to find a negotiated settlement, and then you have one of the senior commanders giving help to Zelensky to come to the opposite conclusion, is really something President Trump's administration needs to address. That's not the guy that I want to charge one more day, because he's working at cross purposes policy-wise to what the president of the United States is.